Rebecca Stevenson stood in her immaculate kitchen, putting the finishing touches on a colorful birthday cake. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on the granite countertops. She stepped back, admiring her handiwork, a perfect confection for her son Ethan's 12th birthday. "Mom, where should I put these?" Ethan's voice called from the living room. Rebecca wiped her hands on her apron and stepped out of the kitchen. Her son stood amidst a sea of brightly wrapped gifts, his arms full. "Let's set them on the side table, sweetheart," she said, helping him arrange the presents. "We don't want them in the way when guests arrive." As they worked, Rebecca caught a glimpse of herself in the hallway mirror. She paused, straightening her blouse and tucking a strand of honey-blonde hair behind her ear. The woman staring back at her looked calm and collected, the perfect suburban wife and mother. But beneath that carefully cultivated exterior, a storm was brewing. The doorbell chimed, jolting Rebecca from her thoughts. "I'll get it," Ethan exclaimed, bounding towards the door. Rebecca followed, her heart rate quickening as she heard familiar voices in the entryway. Her husband Mark stepped inside, his arm casually draped around a young woman's waist. Jessica, his secretary and mistress. "Happy birthday, champ," Mark exclaimed, ruffling Ethan's hair. "Look who I ran into at the office. Jessica was kind enough to help me carry your present." Rebecca's smile never faltered as she stepped forward to greet them. "Mark, darling. Jessica, how lovely to see you. Thank you for helping out." She leaned in to kiss her husband's cheek, the scent of unfamiliar perfume lingering in the air between them. Jessica shifted uncomfortably, her youthful face betraying a mix of guilt and nervousness. "Mrs. Stevenson, thank you for having me. I hope I'm not intruding." "Nonsense," Rebecca said, her voice warm and welcoming. "The more the merrier. Please come in. Can I get you something to drink?" As they moved into the living room, Rebecca caught Mark's eye. He looked relieved, clearly interpreting her gracious behavior as a sign that his secret was safe. Little did he know that behind her perfect hostess demeanor, Rebecca was setting the stage for a confrontation that would shatter their carefully constructed facade. The next hour passed in a whirlwind of arrivals. Neighbors, colleagues, and Ethan's friends filled the house with laughter and chatter. Rebecca flitted from group to group, the consummate hostess, her smile never wavering. She poured drinks, offered hors d'oeuvres, and made sure everyone was comfortable. Mark, meanwhile, tried to maintain a casual distance from Jessica, but Rebecca didn't miss the lingering glances and subtle touches they exchanged. She filed away each interaction, adding fuel to the fire that burned within her. As the party reached its peak, Rebecca found herself in the kitchen, preparing to bring out the cake. She stood for a moment, hands gripping the counter, and allowed herself a brief moment of vulnerability. The weight of her knowledge, the pain of betrayal, and the anticipation of what was to come threatened to overwhelm her. But then, like a switch being flipped, Rebecca straightened her spine, picked up the cake, and plastered on her brightest smile. She had a plan, and nothing, not even the sight of her husband with his mistress in their family home, would deter her from seeing it through. With steady hands, Rebecca carried the cake into the living room, where eager faces awaited. As everyone gathered to sing Happy Birthday, her eyes met those of her closest friends. In their knowing glances, she found the strength she needed for what lay ahead. As the last notes of the song faded away, Ethan leaned forward to blow out his candles. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows across the faces gathered around the table, momentarily masking the undercurrent of tension that had begun to permeate the room. Rebecca began cutting the cake, her movements precise and controlled. She handed the first slice to Ethan, ruffling his hair affectionately. "Make a wish, sweetheart," she said, her voice full of warmth. As she continued to distribute cake, Rebecca's friends watched her closely. Linda, her next-door neighbor and confidant of 20 years, noticed the tightness around Rebecca's eyes, the way her smile didn't quite reach them. She exchanged a worried glance with Sarah, another close friend, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Across the room, Mark laughed a little too loudly at something Jessica had said. His hand rested on the small of her back for a moment too long, and he quickly withdrew it when he caught Rebecca looking their way. Jessica shifted uncomfortably, acutely aware of the sideways glances and whispered comments from the other guests. Ethan, perceptive beyond his years, sensed the strange atmosphere. He watched his mother carefully, noting how she seemed to be everywhere at once, refilling drinks, engaging in conversation, always smiling, but somehow different. There was a new edge to her movements, a sharpness in her eyes that he'd never seen before. As the afternoon wore on, the children gravitated towards the backyard, eager to escape the inexplicable tension inside. They chased each other around the carefully tended garden, their laughter a stark contrast to the muted conversations of the adults. Inside, Rebecca orchestrated the party with the precision of a conductor. She guided conversations, smoothed over awkward pauses, and kept everyone engaged. But to those who knew her best, it was clear that something was simmering beneath the surface. Linda cornered her in the kitchen under the pretense of helping with the dishes. "Becca," she whispered, concern etched on her face. "Are you okay? Do you need us to do anything?" Rebecca's facade cracked for just a moment, revealing a glimpse of the turmoil within. She squeezed Linda's hand gratefully. "Just stick to the plan," she murmured. "It'll all be over soon." Meanwhile, Mark found himself increasingly on edge. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, judged. Every time he turned around, he seemed to catch someone looking away quickly or whispering behind their hand. Jessica, too, was visibly uncomfortable, her earlier confidence replaced by a desire to disappear. "Maybe I should go," she suggested quietly to Mark during a lull in the festivities. Mark shook his head, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. "No, that would look suspicious. Just act normal." But normal was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. The air in the room felt thick with unspoken words and hidden knowledge. Even the most oblivious guests had begun to notice that something was amiss. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the living room, Rebecca gathered everyone for party games. She suggested charades, her eyes glinting with a hint of mischief that made Mark's stomach churn. "I'll go first," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the room. She mimed opening a book, then pointed to Mark. "Story? Someone guessed." Rebecca shook her head, her gaze never leaving her husband's increasingly pale face. "Secret?" another voice called out. Rebecca's smile widened as she nodded, and in that moment, Mark knew. The game was up. "Friends, family," Rebecca began, her voice steady and clear. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate Ethan's birthday. But as it turns out, we have something else to acknowledge today." Mark shifted uneasily, his hand instinctively reaching for Jessica, who stood frozen like a deer in headlights. Rebecca's eyes locked onto her husband's. "Mark, darling, would you care to share with our guests the nature of your relationship with Jessica? No? Then allow me." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. "I have here a collection of text messages, emails, and hotel receipts that paint quite a vivid picture of your extracurricular activities." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Ethan and his younger sister Ava, who had been hovering near the doorway, moved closer to their mother, confusion and hurt evident on their young faces. "Rebecca, please," Mark started, his voice strained. "This isn't the time or place." "Oh, I think it's exactly the right time and place," Rebecca cut him off, her voice sharp but controlled. "You brought your mistress into our home, to our son's birthday party. You've made this public, Mark." She turned to address the stunned guests. "For months, I've lived with the knowledge of my husband's infidelity. I've smiled and played the role of the perfect wife while he carried on an affair with a woman young enough to be our daughter." Jessica flinched at these words, her face burning with shame. Rebecca continued, her voice gaining strength. "I've agonized over how to handle this, how to protect our children, how to salvage what's left of my dignity, and I've realized that the only way forward is through the truth." She clicked a button on her phone, and suddenly the room was filled with Mark's voice, intimate and unmistakable, professing his love for Jessica. Mark lunged forward. "Turn that off!" he shouted, his composure completely shattered. Linda and Sarah stepped between Mark and Rebecca, forming a protective barrier. Other guests murmured in disapproval, some shaking their heads at Mark, others offering words of support to Rebecca. "I'm not doing this to humiliate you, Mark," Rebecca said, her voice softening slightly. "I'm doing this because I refuse to live a lie any longer. I refuse to model for our children that it's okay to be treated with such disrespect." She turned to Ethan and Ava, who were clinging to each other, tears streaming down their faces. "I'm so sorry you have to witness this, my loves, but I want you to know that it's okay to stand up for yourself, to demand honesty and respect in your relationships." As Rebecca's words hung in the air, the room fell into a stunned silence. The perfect facade had crumbled, leaving in its wake a mess of raw emotions and shattered trust. But amid the chaos, Rebecca felt the first stirrings of something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. The once festive atmosphere of the party had evaporated, replaced by a thick tension that seemed to press down on everyone present. Guests shuffled awkwardly, torn between the social instinct to leave and a morbid fascination with the unfolding drama. Rebecca, having said her piece, stood tall amidst the wreckage of her marriage. Her friends formed a protective circle around her and the children, offering silent support and daring anyone to approach with ill intent. Mark, his face a mask of shock and anger, finally found his voice. "You had no right," he hissed at Rebecca, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "To air our dirty laundry like this, in front of everyone? What about the kids?" Rebecca's eyes flashed. "What about the kids, Mark? Did you think about them when you were sneaking around with Jessica? Did you consider their feelings when you brought her here today?" Jessica, who had been trying to make herself as small as possible in the corner, suddenly burst into tears. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, addressing no one in particular. "I never meant for any of this to happen." The room's attention swiveled to the young woman, and Rebecca felt a complicated mix of emotions: anger, pity, disgust. "I think it's best if you leave now, Jessica," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. As Jessica made her way to the door, several of Rebecca's friends blocked her path. Linda, usually the picture of suburban politeness, fixed Jessica with a steely gaze. "I hope you understand that you're not welcome in this neighborhood anymore," she said quietly. "Actions have consequences." With Jessica gone, the focus returned to Mark and Rebecca. Neighbors who had known them for years looked between the two, reassessing everything they thought they knew about the couple. "How long has this been going on?" someone asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Mark opened his mouth to answer, but Rebecca beat him to it. "6 months that I know of," she said. "Possibly longer. But does it really matter? Once is enough to break a marriage." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Mark looked around desperately, seeking any ally, any sympathetic face. He found none. Ethan, who had been quietly processing everything, suddenly spoke up. "Dad, is it true? Did you really cheat on Mom?" The raw pain in his son's voice seemed to finally break through Mark's defenses. His shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. "Ethan, Eva, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt any of you." "But you did," Eva said, her young voice trembling with a mixture of sadness and anger. "You hurt all of us." As the last guest trickled out, offering awkward goodbyes and promises to check in later, Rebecca found herself alone with her children and the shattered remains of her marriage. Mark had left, shamefaced and silent, after a terse conversation about where he would stay for the night. The house, so recently filled with the sounds of celebration, now felt cavernous and empty. Rebecca moved through the rooms mechanically, cleaning up party debris, her mind reeling from the events of the day. In the kitchen, she found Ethan and Eva sitting at the table, their faces pale and drawn. The birthday cake, barely touched, sat between them like a cruel reminder of how quickly joy could turn to ashes. "Mom?" Eva's small voice broke the silence. "What happens now?" Rebecca's heart clenched at the uncertainty in her daughter's tone. She sat down, pulling both children close. "Now, we take care of each other," she said softly. "Things are going to be different, but we're going to get through this together." Ethan looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but determined. "I hate him," he said, his voice cracking. "How could he do this to us?" Rebecca took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Your father made a terrible mistake, but he still loves you both very much. It's okay to be angry, to be hurt. Those feelings are valid. But try not to let hate take root in your heart. It'll only hurt you in the long run." As they talked, Rebecca was struck by her children's resilience. Despite their pain, they asked insightful questions, expressed their fears, and even managed to crack a few weak smiles as they reminisced about happier times. Later that night, after she had tucked Ethan and Eva into bed, Rebecca found herself alone in the master bedroom. She stared at the king-size bed, the sight of it bringing a fresh wave of pain and anger. With sudden determination, she stripped the sheets, stuffing them into a garbage bag. Then she dragged the mattress off the bed frame and leaned it against the wall. Exhausted but unable to sleep, Rebecca made her way to the garage. She rummaged through boxes of old art supplies, remnants of a passion she had set aside years ago to focus on her family. Finding a large canvas and some paints, she returned to the bedroom. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, Rebecca stood back and looked at what she had created. The painting was raw and emotional. A riot of dark colors shot through with streaks of vibrant hope. It wasn't technically perfect, but it was honest in a way her life hadn't been for a long time. Hanging the still wet canvas on the wall where the bed had been, Rebecca felt a small sense of triumph. This room, like her life, was no longer defined by her marriage. It was a blank slate, ready for whatever came next. The weeks following the fateful birthday party were a blur of legal consultations, tearful conversations, and sleepless nights. Rebecca threw herself into the practicalities of separation, determined to protect her children and secure their future. Sarah, with her legal background, proved invaluable during this time. She helped Rebecca navigate the complexities of divorce proceedings, explaining legal jargon and offering advice on how to approach negotiations with Mark. "Remember, Becca," Sarah said during one of their late-night strategy sessions, "you're in a strong position here. Don't let guilt or misplaced loyalty make you settle for less than you and the kids deserve." Rebecca nodded, grateful for her friend's unwavering support. "I just want this to be over," she admitted, "but I also want to do it right." As autumn settled over the neighborhood, bringing with it a chill in the air and a carpet of golden leaves, Rebecca found herself slowly adjusting to her new reality. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a cautious optimism about the future. One crisp Saturday morning, Rebecca stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting a paint-splattered smock. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. There was a confidence in her posture, a spark in her eyes that had been missing for far too long. "Mom, are you ready?" Ethan called from downstairs. "We're going to be late for the art fair." Rebecca smiled, giving herself one last approving nod before heading down. The local art fair had been her idea, a way to showcase her rediscovered passion for painting. With encouragement from Linda and Sarah, she had submitted some of her work and had been accepted as a vendor. As they set up her booth, Rebecca felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. Ethan and Eva worked alongside her, arranging paintings and setting out business cards. "These are really beautiful, Mom," Eva said, holding up a vibrant landscape. "Do you think people will buy them?" "I hope so, sweetie," Rebecca replied. "But you know what? Even if they don't, I'm just proud of myself for putting them out there." As the day progressed, Rebecca was pleasantly surprised by the positive response to her work. Several paintings sold, and she received numerous compliments from attendees. But more than the sales or praise, it was the sense of accomplishment that filled her with joy. Midway through the afternoon, Rebecca looked up to see a familiar face approaching her booth. It was Tom, a single father whose daughter was in Eva's class. They had chatted a few times at school events, but Rebecca had always been careful to maintain a polite distance, mindful of her married status. "Rebecca," Tom greeted her warmly. "I had no idea you were an artist. These are fantastic." Rebecca felt a slight blush creep into her cheeks. "Thank you, Tom. It's something I've recently rediscovered." They fell into easy conversation, discussing art techniques and favorite painters. Rebecca found herself laughing at Tom's dry humor, enjoying the simple pleasure of adult conversation that didn't revolve around her divorce or domestic responsibilities. As Tom left with one of her smaller paintings tucked under his arm, Ethan sidled up to his mother. "He seems nice," he said, a hint of a smirk on his face. Rebecca ruffled her son's hair affectionately. "He is nice, and a good father from what I've seen." "You know, Mom," Ethan said carefully, "it would be okay if you wanted to, date someone. Eventually." Rebecca's eyes widened in surprise. "Oh, Ethan, I'm not sure I'm ready for that just yet, but thank you for saying that. It means a lot." As they packed up at the end of the day, Rebecca felt a sense of contentment wash over her. She had taken a risk, put herself out there, and it had paid off. It was a small step, but an important one on her journey of self-rediscovery. That evening, as the three of them celebrated her success with takeout pizza and a movie, Rebecca looked around at her children, Ethan growing more thoughtful and mature by the day, Eva, her creativity blossoming as she sketched in a notebook, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Their family might look different now, but it was strong. They had weathered the storm together and come out the other side, not unscathed, but unbroken. As winter descended upon the neighborhood, bringing with it a blanket of snow and holiday cheer, Rebecca found herself facing unexpected challenges. The initial burst of energy and determination that had carried her through the first few months of separation was beginning to wane, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. One frosty morning, as she struggled to start her car for the third time that week, Rebecca felt tears of frustration prickling at her eyes. She had never paid much attention to car maintenance before. That had always been Mark's domain. Now, it was just one more thing on her ever-growing list of responsibilities. "Need a hand?" a voice called out. Rebecca looked up to see Tom, her neighbor and recent friend, approaching with a toolbox in hand. "Oh, Tom," she sighed, relief evident in her voice. "You're a lifesaver." As Tom worked on the car, Rebecca found herself opening up about her recent struggles. "I just feel so overwhelmed sometimes," she admitted. "There's so much to learn, so many things I never had to think about before." Tom listened sympathetically as he tinkered under the hood. "It's not easy," he agreed. "When my wife passed, I felt like I was drowning in all the new responsibilities. But you know what? It gets easier. You're stronger than you think, Rebecca." His words, coupled with his kind smile, warmed Rebecca more than she cared to admit. As the car engine roared to life, she felt a spark of hope ignite within her as well. That evening, as Rebecca helped Ava with her homework, she noticed her daughter seemed distracted and upset. "What's wrong, sweetie?" she asked, brushing a strand of hair from Ava's face. Ava hesitated before answering. "Some kids at school were saying mean things about Dad," she mumbled. "They said he's a bad person, and that our family is broken now." Rebecca's heart clenched at her daughter's words. She had been so focused on her own healing and keeping the household running that she hadn't fully considered how the divorce might be affecting her children's social lives. "Oh, Ava," she said, pulling her daughter into a tight hug. "I'm so sorry you had to hear that. But listen to me. Our family isn't broken. It's different now, yes, but we're still whole. And your dad, he made mistakes, but he's not a bad person. He loves you very much." As they talked, Rebecca made a mental note to speak with the school counselor about providing additional support for Ethan and Ava. She also realized it was time for a frank conversation with Mark about presenting a united front for their children's sake, despite their personal differences. The holidays brought a new set of challenges as Rebecca and Mark navigated the complexities of co-parenting. Their first attempt at sharing custody over Christmas break was a disaster of miscommunication and hurt feelings. "You said you'd have them back by 7, Rebecca fumed into the phone. "It's nearly 9, and Ethan has a school project due tomorrow." Mark's exasperated sigh crackled through the speaker. "I'm sorry, okay? We lost track of time. I'm bringing them home now." When Mark arrived with the children, the tension between the former spouses was palpable. Ethan and Eva shuffled inside quickly, sensing the storm brewing between their parents. "We need to talk," Rebecca said firmly, stepping onto the porch and closing the door behind her. For the next hour, Rebecca and Mark hashed out their grievances, their voices occasionally rising in frustration. But as the night wore on, something shifted. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or maybe the realization that their current approach wasn't working for anyone, least of all their children. "Look," Mark said finally, running a hand through his hair. "I know I messed up. Not just with the affair, but with everything. I want to do better. For the kids." Rebecca studied her ex-husband's face, seeing genuine remorse and determination there. "Okay," she said softly. "Then let's figure this out. Together." Over the next few weeks, Rebecca and Mark worked on establishing clear boundaries and communication protocols. They created a shared online calendar for the children's activities and appointments, set up regular check-ins to discuss parenting issues, and even managed to attend one of Ethan's basketball games together without incident. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of tension and disagreement. But slowly, they were learning to be parents together, even if they were no longer a couple. As spring bloomed, bringing new life to the world around her, Rebecca felt a corresponding renewal within herself. Her art, once a forgotten hobby, had become a vital outlet for her emotions and a source of unexpected income. One sunny afternoon, As she worked on a new painting in her makeshift studio, formerly the guest bedroom, Rebecca heard a tentative knock on the door. "Come in," she called, not looking up from her canvas. "Mom?" It was Ethan. Can I paint with you?" Rebecca turned, surprised and touched by her son's request. "Of course, sweetheart. I'd love that." She set Ethan up with a small canvas and some acrylics, showing him basic techniques and encouraging him to express himself freely. As they worked side by side, Rebecca marveled at how art was helping to heal not just her, but her family as well. Eva soon joined them, and it became a regular family activity. Rebecca watched with pride and a touch of awe as her children's artistic skills developed, each finding their own unique style and voice. One day, as they were cleaning up after a particularly productive session, Ethan turned to Rebecca with a serious expression. "Mom, I've been thinking," he said. "I want to enter the school art show, but I want to do a collaborative piece, with you and Eva." Rebecca felt a lump form in her throat. "That sounds wonderful, Ethan. What did you have in mind?" Ethan's idea was ambitious, a triptych representing their family's journey through the past year. The first panel would depict the turmoil and pain of the separation. The second would show the process of healing and rediscovery, and the third would represent hope for the future. As they worked on the project over the next few weeks, Rebecca was struck by the depth of emotion and insight her children brought to the piece. Ethan's section was bold and abstract, full of sharp lines and dark colors that gradually gave way to softer shapes and warmer tones. Eva's panel was more literal, featuring 3 figures walking through a storm towards a bright horizon. Rebecca's own contribution tied the other two together, using elements from both her children's styles to create a cohesive whole. As she worked, she realized that the painting was more than just an art project. It was a visual representation of their family's resilience and love for each other. The day of the art show arrived, and the Stevenson family stood proudly beside their creation. As friends, teachers, and community members admired their work, Rebecca felt a sense of peace settle over her. Tom, who had become a steady presence in their lives, approached with a warm smile. "This is incredible," he said, his eyes moving from the painting to Rebecca's face. "You should be very proud." "We are," Rebecca replied, her arms around Ethan and Eva. "Of the painting, and of each other." As she looked at their triptych, titled simply, "Our Journey," Rebecca realized that it represented not just the past year, but a new beginning. The canvas of their lives was far from complete, but the picture it showed was one of strength, love, and endless possibility. As summer approached, Rebecca found herself standing at the threshold of new opportunities. The success of her family's triptych at the school art show had caught the attention of a local gallery owner, who offered her a chance to showcase her work in an upcoming exhibition. "This is huge, Becca," Linda exclaimed over coffee one morning. "You've come so far in such a short time. Are you going to do it?" Rebecca hesitated, twirling her spoon in her cup. "I want to, but I'm scared," she admitted. "What if no one likes my work? What if I'm not ready for this level of exposure?" Linda reached across the table, squeezing her friend's hand. "Listen to me. You are ready. Your art is beautiful and meaningful. And even if it doesn't go perfectly, you'll learn and grow from the experience. Isn't that what you've been teaching Ethan and Ava?" Rebecca smiled, remembering the countless times she'd encouraged her children to take risks and believe in themselves. "You're right," she said, straightening her shoulders. "I'm going to do it." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as Rebecca prepared for the exhibition. She painted with a fervor she hadn't felt in years, pouring her emotions onto canvas after canvas. Ethan and Eva pitched in, helping to frame pieces and offering their opinions on which works to include. One evening, as Rebecca was putting the finishing touches on a particularly challenging piece, she heard a knock at the studio door. It was Eva, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Mom, can I talk to you about something?" Rebecca set down her brush, giving her daughter her full attention. "Of course, sweetie. What's on your mind?" Eva took a deep breath. "I was wondering, would it be okay if I invited Dad to your exhibition?" Rebecca felt a moment of panic at the thought of Mark seeing her art, her vulnerability on display. But as she looked at Eva's hopeful face, she realized that this was about more than just her feelings. "That's very thoughtful of you, Eva," she said carefully. "If you'd like to invite him, I think that would be fine. It's important that we can all support each other, even if things are different now." Eva's face lit up with relief and excitement. "Thanks, Mom. I think he'll really like seeing how amazing your art is." As Eva skipped out of the room, Rebecca turned back to her painting, a mix of emotions swirling within her. She realized that true healing meant not just moving forward, but also making peace with the past. The night of the exhibition arrived, bringing with it a nervous energy that filled the Stevenson household. Rebecca stood in front of her mirror, smoothing down her dress and taking deep breaths to calm her racing heart. "Mom, you look beautiful," Ethan said, appearing in the doorway. He was dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and looked suddenly older, more mature. "Thank you, sweetheart," Rebecca replied, touched by her son's compliment. "Are you both ready to go?" As they drove to the gallery, Rebecca's mind raced with last-minute worries. Would people understand her art? Would they see the journey she'd been on, the growth and healing represented in each brushstroke? The gallery was already buzzing with activity when they arrived. Rebecca's paintings lined the walls, each one a window into her soul. She watched nervously as people moved from piece to piece, discussing her work in hushed tones. "This is exquisite," a voice said behind her. Rebecca turned to see Tom, looking dapper in a suit. "I knew you were talented, but this is something special." Before Rebecca could respond, she spotted Mark entering the gallery, looking slightly out of place but determined. Eva immediately ran to greet him, while Ethan hung back, his expression guarded. Mark made his way over to Rebecca and Tom, nodding politely. "Congratulations, Becca," he said, his voice sincere. "This is quite an achievement." "Thank you, Mark," Rebecca replied, surprised by how calm she felt. "I'm glad you could make it." As the evening progressed, Rebecca found herself moving from group to group, discussing her art and her journey. She watched with pride as Ethan and Eva expertly fielded questions about the triptych they had created together, which held a place of honor in the exhibition. Towards the end of the night, the gallery owner approached Rebecca with a broad smile. "My dear, this has been a tremendous success. Several pieces have sold, and I've had inquiries about commissioning work. How would you feel about a more permanent arrangement with the gallery?" Rebecca felt a rush of excitement and disbelief. I would be honored," she managed to say. As the last of the guests trickled out, Rebecca found herself alone in the gallery, surrounded by her art. She felt a profound sense of accomplishment and gratitude. This exhibition represented not just her talent, but her journey of healing and self-discovery. 6 months after the exhibition, Rebecca stood in her newly redecorated living room. The walls, once adorned with memories of a life past, now showcased her own artwork, alongside family photos that told the story of their journey. The divorce was finalized, and while co-parenting with Mark still had its challenges, they had found a way to make it work for the sake of their children. Rebecca had even managed to forgive him, not for his sake, but for her own peace of mind. Her art career was flourishing, with a growing clientele and regular showings at the local gallery. More importantly, it had become a source of joy and self-expression, something that was solely hers. As for matters of the heart, Rebecca had slowly opened herself up to the possibility of new relationships. She and Tom had been on a few casual dates, taking things slow and putting their children first. It was too early to tell where it might lead, but for the first time in years, Rebecca felt excited about the prospect of romantic companionship. Ethan and Eva burst through the front door, backpacks slung over their shoulders, chattering excitedly about their day at school. Rebecca listened with a smile, marveling at how far they'd all come. Later that evening, as Rebecca tucked Eva into bed, her daughter asked, "Are you happy, Mom? Really happy?" Rebecca paused, reflecting on the question. The past year had been a journey of pain, growth, and self-discovery. But as she looked at her daughter's hopeful face, she knew the answer with certainty. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, her voice full of warmth and conviction. "I really am." As she turned out the light and closed the door, Rebecca felt a sense of peace and anticipation for what the future might hold. The perfect facade was gone, but in its place stood something far more valuable, a life of authenticity, strength, and endless possibility. Rebecca made her way to her studio, picking up a paintbrush and standing before a blank canvas. As she began to paint, she smiled to herself. This canvas, like her life, was no longer defined by her past. It was a new beginning, ready for whatever beautiful, messy, wonderful things were yet to come. What did you think of Rebecca's attitude? Would you do the same? Leave a comment with your opinion. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I'm sure there will be new videos to surprise you. Like and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our next videos. See you soon.